Blessings. This is Oracle, welcoming you into the Three Treasure Tea Talk today. Enjoy this podcast brought to you by Nico and Friends.
All right. Well, welcome, Dare, to the Three Treasures Tea Talk chat.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
glad to be here.
yeah, thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast. You're sort of a celebrity of sorts in the scene that we're in, probably of like the Liu Ming scene. I don't know what it is,
I
but
don't know. I don't think I would say I'm a celebrity. I would say I'm an outsider for sure. I'm a definite outsider. That's my experience of it. But I'm definitely a weird cat. I mean, I think I'm a weird cat.
well, I love this podcast is all about cool cat. So you're at the right place.
Good.
Yeah, and I kind of want to open up the conversation and get into it. Yesterday I was chatting with Dr. Morris about his work in the community in the Bayview, and a clinic he ran there for over 10 years that was providing care for people that are going through substance dependence and withdrawal and detox. And so I want to bring that same energy into today's conversation about really kind of going deeper into addiction itself and
Yeah.
how you view it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just start there.
Great. I'm excited. I mean, I think I just want to preface it by saying, like, when we talk in the West about trauma, what we're really talking about is oppression and addiction. And those two things can't be separated because the more oppressed somebody is, internally or externally, right? Whether you're doing it to yourself, oppressing yourself, or you're oppressing other people, it doesn't really matter because it's interdependent. But the point just being, like, the more oppressed a system is, the more addiction will appear in that system,
Mm.
right? And I have to say one more thing, which is also that addiction seems to be, from my perspective and experience, like a blocked, stagnated, or frustrated creativity,
Mm.
which is eros. So, if we want to really talk about it and get a little bit mystical, the erotic life force that we all have to create and to generate good things for each other, right? When that is blocked via oppression, poverty, abuse, that generally seems to create addiction patterns in the system. Whether you believe that things are addictive or not is not really the point. It's that we seem to be able to create an addiction out of anything,
Yes.
right?
Yes, in like
So,
brains,
yeah.
humans.
Yeah, so I also sometimes just say, I think that addiction and creativity are two sides of the same coin. It just depends on which side you fell on in the oppression game that we're in, right?
Mm.
And my view of addiction is very much broader than just substance abuse. I mean, it includes that, but
Yeah.
but I've seen in myself and others, clients, etc., just the world, we can become addicted to narratives, ideologies, behaviors, relationship dynamics. There's really no end to the way that we can weaponize
Mm.
anything and turn that into an addiction. So that's sort of like, in some way, that's the most basic thesis I can provide without going deeper yet into the more mystical aspects of this. But I think just for like where we're starting as a base so everyone can maybe follow along, when we say trauma, or when I say trauma, I'm really saying oppression. And when I
Yeah.
say an oppression and addiction are linked, and addiction and creativity are linked. So we
Beautiful.
have to first put that on the table, I think, before we get into the weirder aspects of
Right.
like how we deal with it and like what's maybe actually happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I called you a celebrity is because you're what I mean to say is you're like authority in the field, in my opinion, which
Just a
you
weird.
don't like this. But I'll just
No,
say
I think
no
it's
one else is
funny.
saying,
I think it's funny.
no one else has. I've been studying addiction. I studied neuroscience over almost like 17 years ago, I started my journey of addiction. So I really take, I this is my special interest. I
Yeah,
have
totally.
many. And so what you're saying resonates incredibly. And I know that there's truth in what you're saying. I can feel that truth has like a resonance. And I've sought so many other ways of explaining it, or like, there's Bessel's book of like the body keeps
Yeah.
score, but
Which is not
it's
correct, but
it's not
yes.
correct. It's literally not correct. Fuck that book. That book's hella traumatizing to read if you have.
Yeah, it's
Wait,
really
so
bad.
but it's
Yeah.
really bad. So this is what I'm saying. Like, no one is having these conversations. The other book, let's talk about Gabor Mate, bruh, and his Hungry Ghost. Like,
Yeah.
I just have to name before we like go into like
Yeah.
the
No,
truth,
all of this
in my
stuff is the
opinion.
stuff I also started on too. It's like
Right.
I believe they put a few bricks on the road that were necessary, but the more you get into it, the more you realize how kind of flawed the model is. It's really
Yeah.
scary, right? It's
Yeah.
really, it's like too reductive and it's just, it doesn't, I say this a lot, it's a mismatch. I think we're in an evolutionary mismatch. I think we're in an educational mismatch,
It's an
like,
evidence. I mean, the reason Gabor Mate is so popular, I mean, it's definitely because he's a man, a white man, or a Jewish man, and his story of his trauma when he was a baby in the concentration camp. Like, no, like that's why you're famous. It's not because you have any spiritual foundation as a human. And I know because I went deeper with him, and I've had more of like a closer relationship with him as like a intellectual, and we've had one-on-one chats
yeah,
a little bit, and then I was like, oh, you are misguided in your own journey like as a human, and so definitely shouldn't be a leader and telling people anything. Like, you need
yeah,
to unpack your stuff. But his whole thing in the book was like, oh, I'm an addict too, just like these castaways, and I'm a castaway. And essentially, like, there was so much shame in his view and not taking into account the oppression that these people are dealing with, and basically like everyone is just making it an individual problem and putting
that's
it
a
all
big
on the
issue.
individual, which
Yeah.
is like happens even in recycling plastic. Like,
No, it's
it's
crazy.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing in the West is the limit of the ideology of the individual, which is a fabrication, which is a fiction. It's a fiction. It's just like gender, it's just like race. They're fictions, but they have real impacts.
Yes.
And those impacts are oppressive. Those impacts are oppressive. They're
Yeah.
even oppressive to the people who benefit from them.
Mm.
That's the issue. That's what
Right,
we're
like how
dealing
men
with.
aren't allowed to cry, actually, like that's
Yeah.
oppressive.
Yeah, or just like yeah, everything about the disposability of our culture, how we dispose of people and beings, not just human beings, but we dispose of beings, right?
Mm.
We dispose of trees just because they're in the way of a highway, and we don't have any ritual for that. We don't care. We just do what we do as people, and we think because we're now in the modern world, and the modern world is, like rational and not superstitious. But what I learned in dealing with my addiction, and this is the reality, like I was also really on the road to becoming like an alcoholic and just like a mess, codependent. I'm not saying I'm completely cured from that. What I'm saying is that even that languaging is faulty. Because if addiction really is frustrated eros, you're never cured because it's an ongoing practice to be a human being, to be in right relationship. It's ongoing. You can't just set it and forget it.
Mm.
You can't do that. You can't just be like, oh, I don't need to pray today. I don't need to talk to Pachamama today. I don't need to say hello to my ancestors today. There's a point at which the ritual functions of these things that I'm talking about, like they're functional, they're ritual functions, they're not actually religious. Religion has stolen ritual from the people on a large level. Ritual sort of took it and said, this is now all the purview of religion. But unfortunately, we need ritual to deal with these things like addiction. It's not religious ritual, but it is ritual.
Mm.
And if we don't have real ritual, to deal with these things. They deal with us.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Well, that's where you look around you. It's like you can't avoid you literally can't even do the ostrich in the sand because someone's stomping right next to the ostrich head. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna feel the shit. Like
Yeah, right. There's no escaping from the entanglement of our lives, right? There's no escaping from, like I just read today, heartbreaking news that like Mexico City, 22 million people, is running out of water.
oh
They might run out of water in June to
oh
September.
fuck.
Like this is like insane news, right? Like this is
Oh
like
my God.
not this is like not a test, like this is so, like I laugh
Well,
only because it's a response to how grotesque it is.
Mexico City, I just learned this. I'm so ignorant on geography and history. Was the
Yeah.
first of all a huge lake that got drained by, I believe, I actually don't know, I don't want to get it wrong, but by either the Aztecs or the
Yeah.
Spaniards, and then was the capital of the Aztec. I didn't even know that. Like I was in Mexico City in December and it's like, wow, it's like real awesome there. And I went to the museums, but that is literally the capital of a whole empire. And people are just living there. Like, I didn't know that. I'm sure a lot of people don't know that. And I'm like pretty connected. I have an altar, ancestral altar. I say hi to my
Yeah.
ancestors
Yeah.
and like,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
there's an endless amount of knowledge we can like learn, but these important things like this was a lake. We should
Yeah.
have kept the water. Now there's no water, and now we can feel the effects of that. And it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
I mean, it took like 400 years, but whatever, like the reality of like we do this as people too. I think we're addicted to more. We don't like degrowth. We want growth, not degrowth. We don't see limitation as a form of wisdom here in this culture, right? We don't see limitation or restraint as a form of wisdom. And we'll get back to restraint because restraint is one of the major ways I've found helping people work with their addictions in a, I guess we could call it a decolonial theatrical methodology, which is to say, using the performance arts in a very particular way with ritual, animistic, non dual ritual, um, in a certain way to titrate their ability to work with intensity, so that they can actually work with the energies of limitation, but they can also work with the energy of pain and fear and hunger, which is really the heart of addiction, right?
Mhm.
Where we get so desirous, we're
Mhm.
so craving, like the Buddha said what? Desire is the root of all suffering. I think that it was mistranslated. I think what he really was meaning was craving is the root of all suffering.
Mhm.
I don't
Right.
think desire is the problem. I
Yeah.
think it's craving that's the issue. And
Because
so when we
desire is
understand
human and
that,
natural. Like desire for peace and like if we're in right
or
relation, it's normal. You have an
that's
appetite.
eros. That's eros, right? It's like the desire of the tree to bear fruit. That's
Right.
not a problem,
Right.
right? It's like
That's natural
the
harmony.
naturalness of sex, the naturalness of
Yeah.
procreation, but the naturalness of creation, like making art and all the things. The natural outcropping of this isn't the problem. So desire is not the root of all suffering. It's craving, which is addiction. So I
Mm,
think that if the Buddha were here today, he would have to say that because we have taken things and made them all mean all this wacky
right.
shit.
Well, yeah, because the
Um,
Ascetics took that to the next level. But I mean, I mean, that was the whole Buddhist story, right? He was like, I'm not going to be oppressive because it's the same.
yeah,
Like to be an ascetic is just the same as to be an alcoholic.
yeah.
So it seemed like he already knew that.
Well, I think there's
Yeah.
a root kind of impulse. And I think that this is sort of what my work tries to feel like, have people experience something that then only in hindsight you can explain. I think also in this culture, we want to explain things before we experience them, right? We do that in this culture a lot. I want to explain it, but I haven't really experienced it. And I like to tell people understanding only comes from hindsight. And that's a real That's real hard to deal with. Like we won't understand something until we've done something a lot, and then we look back and go, "Oh, okay, I can kind of see the shape of what I was trying to do," or I made mistakes, but those were worth it because now I see what like you have to have this body of knowledge. Um,
But even in this
yeah.
moment, you're explaining it all, like you're giving away what the wax on,
Yeah.
wax off, like you're taking out, you're like, you're giving it to us still, which is why everyone's gonna love this and eat this shit up. People are gonna eat because they're fucking hungry.
Well, it is
So
true
like,
that I can explain this stuff, and I think that some of it comes through, but I always have to really caution people, you know, it takes years of a certain kind of practice to get even a little bit close to something that might feel like liberation inside. And the method that I'm using is a kind of theatrical method because I believe that the roots of theater and ritual are the same thing. The roots of all the things that we learned about appeasing spirits and hungry ghosts. I'm talking way back in Africa, like 300,000 years ago. I'm not talking about just the warring states period of China or something. I'm talking about
yeah, like the Dogon tribe,
like
yeah,
Bayaka tribe, central
rituals
hunter
and
gatherer
games
stuff,
and drumming.
and then also like Neolithic animism, which is sort of like pre-agricultural to a little bit through agriculture. So I'm really trying to source from as much as I can and as much as I'm able to source from, you know, 10,000, 8,000 years ago and beyond. Like I'm really trying to do that with the right anthropological data that isn't colonial and all this stuff. Because
Mhm.
there are tribes in Africa right now that have an oral tradition that they can trace back at least 50 to 80,000 years, which is actually the oldest line that we have right now as human beings. Like, I don't think people understand how crazy these numbers are.
Is that connected to the Sirius star system? I
I
believe.
mean, all of these people are star people in the sense that they all used astrogeomantic
Right.
divination in a certain sense. Um, but I could say, it's really hard because we're here and they're there, and we don't live in the same environment that they lived in. But what we can do is study people who live in that same environment now, who have the same language structure, the same songs, right? And so there are a number of groups in Central Africa they can trace their historical lineage via song and oral culture,
Mm.
very old. And I'm going to sneeze here in a second, but
Yeah.
one of the things that I had to learn how to do, because when you do the things that I'm hinting at, you go into various trance states. Okay. And it's not like, oh, you take the ayahuasca and go into trance state. That's nice too. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying you can do that without a drug because it's natural if you have the right conditions. And for some people, you don't even get to choose the conditions, it just happens.
Like
So we
possession.
live in a, yes, yes. So we live in a culture where there are certain people who have certain astrological patterns, certain fate patterns, where they're wired for possession, or they're wired to be like a trance medium or something, and we no longer have a place for them in this society. So people who hear voices, like, if you really want to get into like mad studies and stuff, it's like a lot of these folks would have been trained in another society to
Yes.
deal with that, and not only deal with it, learn to use it correctly for the benefit of their community.
Right.
But instead, we hospitalize them, we ostracize them, we oppress them. Those people largely either become addicts or they kill themselves or they get into fights and they, die in a fight or a gunfight or something. And then we go, well, they're just crazy. And that's just how it shakes out. But the problem with that is that that's not reality. That's the colonial lie about reality. And I'm saying all this because it's completely interconnected with everything I'm talking about. Like it might seem
So
like it's
big.
not, but it
No, it
really
feels
is.
very connected. I mean, literally what brings to mind when you say that, I mean, obviously you think of like like people that are homeless, right? I mean, I live in San Francisco. When I walk to work in the clinic,
Yep.
it's insane, and it's only, it hasn't improved. And the one week that, people, big leaders came, they cleaned up, and
Yeah.
just these things are so insulting, but that's not really what came to mind. What came to mind was being part of these groups, like the context of a particular time over 10 years ago when there was a mass. I saw it, I see what you're saying, and I saw it almost like an immune response. Like there's cancer and we are cells in a body, and so we all just came to the cancer and surrounded it, which was kind of what happened in this political movement. But it was a movement where people were like camping out together and literally on the fringes of society in the same way that you're talking about. And I mean, in San Francisco, it was a lot of people from the Bluegrass Festival. The way that the timing aligned, and all these little hippy dippy white kids became part of this huge movement that was months long, and it was part of their path too,
Yeah.
to kind of be these cells to say, like, I mean, the
Yeah.
motto of that movement was like, fuck the rich people. Fuck the 0.01% is kind of what it should
Yeah.
have been. But
Totally.
so like that was a time when these people, or like kind of, that's kind of what, because they're fringe people, they're on the edges, they're intense, but they're educated. I mean, it was a ton of like young people that were like ASB president type mini politicians that thrived in that little environment. And so, that created issues, and there was a lot of,
Yeah.
but still it was a time when there was allowance of these space for people to express themselves in an experimental way, and it was very threatening, and it was very quickly shut
Right.
down, nationally
Of course.
coordinated. And
Right.
so, so it's like that narrative has a lot of points in here, and one of them is people know this already, and it's actively like shut down. It's actively
Absolutely.
oppressed, even more
Absolutely.
especially oppressed, because there is awareness that there is power in seers.
Right. I mean, we are in some way, I'm trying to reconstruct something that can't really be reconstructed because we have to remix it for the time that we're in. So we're kind of, I kind of think of what I am as like a kind of ritual remixer, which is like there are basic structures. This is really important to talk about because a space is a structure and a structure is a space. And a ritual requires a structure and a space, but maybe not the way people think. Because once you have the understanding of ritual structure, you can essentially create ritual anywhere. However, ritual becomes very powerful when a group does it, and this is dangerous to the politicians. So they want to harness us as a biomass weapon against ourselves. They pit us against each other, right? They pit the people against each other. But the people have a technology that politicians cannot break, but they use it. They use it wrong. It's like a toxic ritual, right? It's a toxic ritual. It's like a
uh,
ritual of it's a ritual of the wrong kind of possession, right?
mm,
That's what is happening. That's what government and religion kind of are on some really supremacist, imperialistic level. They're a
yeah,
kind of magical ritual that is bad for everybody. It's bad
right,
for the earth, it's wrong relationship,
yeah,
but it has magical effects. We can see it. It acts like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It's a ritual, right?
right,
What I'm saying though is that like people are human beings, not just the fringe people. But we'll talk, they are important because they are more in some way predetermined, predestined to be vessels in a certain regard. They're just are people like that. And this is just throughout every history. Every single culture in the world has stories about, usually it's a young girl, but not always, who just starts to get possessed. Maybe they have seizures, but then they have visions, and then like it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
It's scratch the surface and you'll find it, right? A lot of these people are also two-spirit. It's just the whole 9 yards, right?
Well, we
They
would call it
also,
in
yeah,
today's level neurodivergent.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you just got to use the right words for the right
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
time.
got to use the word for the time that you're in and all this crap. Like, so we have to understand though that so there are some people who are sort of more tendencies to that. Like they have more tendencies for like oracling or seeing or visioning or dreaming or whatever you want to call it. Because there's so many subdivisions. You don't need to get lost in that though, because everyone has a different talent. So it's not a
Right.
problem, right? It's
It's
not a
not a problem.
competition either. It's not a
No.
competition. It's like I know plenty of TCM doctors when they're doing their work, they're essentially trans channeling, but they're doing it through the structure of Chinese medicine. And without that structure, it maybe doesn't work so well. So that's what we need sometimes. We need
Right.
this focusing of the thing, and then suddenly insight and information and energy moves through the energy moves. It literally goes circulates, right?
Mm.
Um, so people have these tendencies, right? But in the right circumstances, in the right condition, in the right structure, all humans have this potential. That's the thing that I've seen and that I've known. And the easiest way to just look at it is through the entertainment industry.
Yes.
Currently the
Yes.
easiest way to see it is the entertainment industry, because
100%.
acting, singing, performing are all closer to ritual structure than almost anything else we have, that actually shows people what it's like to feel inspired. So, this word that people say, inspired, that's also a code word for trans channeling.
Mm. Or
Um,
possession.
and
And the,
well, this is where it gets a little fuzzy, because we can be possessed by lots of things. It's not just like, oh, the exorcist ghost or something, you know?
right.
Because if we even look at Chinese medicine, we have the five spirits, right?
Yes. We
So
name
let's
them.
just look at that. Let's just look at that. That's basically saying a human being is always, at least, at the very least, possessed by five spirits at all
Yes.
times.
Well, you are five spirits. You're not this
That's
one soul. And that's what people are like, wait, but the soul. And it's like, no, honey,
that's
you are five. You are
that's
the
the thing.
interrelation of five is makes
That's right.
you. They're like, but where's the one that's really me? And it's like, no, you don't get it. It's the
Right.
interrelation of the
That's
five.
it. That's it. So from this perspective, we can see that the soul is also a collective already.
Yes.
Right? A
So,
collective of five spirits comes together, has a relationship, and that produces the effect we would call a soul.
yeah.
So we have to even just sit with that. I think most people have to sit with that for a little while, because they believe that their soul is theirs.
Right.
And it's like now suddenly it's got a personality like a cartoon character. And
Well,
it's
that's the
like,
scary. That's how you become a ghost, because then the post spirit is the one of your five. Like for our listeners,
yes,
I'm sure we'll break this
yeah.
down later,
Let's get
like
into it.
advanced. But if you believe like what Dare is saying, that but my one soul, that's gonna end up when you die and you still have that belief. That could be the one spirit of your lung, which is called the Po,
Yeah.
most likely be left behind. That's why in China, when someone dies, they get rid of all of their possessions because they don't want the Po to hang out, because the Po is the most likely to, is basically the addictive one. The Po always wants more.
Stick
That's
around.
the lung.
Literally stick around,
You'll
right?
stick around and you won't want to leave because you're like, well, I just need more drugs or more sex, or I need more, or like whatever your little like
Yeah, you have a
ghost,
belief
you
in the
know.
body as
Oh,
yours. You have a belief in your personality as yours. And
yeah.
this is why it's like, to even unravel the thread of addiction, we have to in some way have people remember the reality of what's going on, which is
Mm,
that like the self is a temporary fixation,
mm,
and temporary is the key word here. It's like a
mm.
dream we're having. We're having a dream called the self.
Yeah.
Who is having that dream? That's the better question. If you think you're having the dream, that's wrong.
Yeah.
The dream is having you.
Yeah.
Just like addiction, you think you're in control, the addiction's actually in control. Or for some people, it's an addiction and an ancestral ghost that never got helped. That's
That
the other
part.
thing. So
That's
now we have possession on a lot of levels because you
yeah.
can be possessed by a nature spirit, and
Yeah.
there's millions. You can be
Don't
possessed by
go
some,
camping in the woods, folks, by yourself, by the way, by the way, by the way. Go
unless
ahead.
you have practices, unless you have real practices to protect yourself and
You
stuff like
think
that.
these little white campers got practices?
I hope that their ancestors are helping them. That's what I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because really you have a litany of kinds of spirits. We can just call them like elemental energy if it feels better for people, because I don't want to be like, ooh, it's a ghost. It's like,
Yeah.
no, there's energy in the world, and there's energy in the world, and that has various pathogenic factors at times. We all know that if we drink the wrong water, we get ringworm, we have diarrhea. That's not, we all understand that.
Giardia killed many.
This is just the larger ecosystem of that process of interrelated parasites, bacteria, viruses, and other mitochondria, right? Like you look at your mitochondria, it's like a little bug inside of every cell. Like, what's that about? Like,
Yeah. Who's that? That's the little energy guy.
right? You know what I'm saying? Like, so even when I was going through my sort of gender reframe, and I use they them, I use they them because it's animist. Because it's actually not about this kind of human sexual thing. It's like the five spirits. It's a we, it's a they. It's like it's a there's a bunch of ancestors here. There's like all sorts of shit that I don't really have control over.
Right.
And so the piece that comes from that is a piece that you have to practice, because when you're in that mode of relating, you have to really slow down and really understand the cards that you were dealt, which for me includes ancestral ghosts that didn't get their addictions dealt with, and really gnarly stuff that isn't fun to talk about in public.
Mhm.
I only talk about this stuff honestly, like the details of it, in really ritual containers,
Mm.
because it's just too much energy for people to deal with, and then their ghosts come and it's just a shit show. We don't
I
want
need
that.
to take notes on that because I feel like same, but the container app, I think I'd be sharing like family trauma, just like because I feel like because there's been so much secrecy that I
That's
feel
what
like
yes.
my medicine
Right.
is voicing it, but I do
But the
think that
container is important.
yeah, could
And this is what I learned. I learned all this stuff the hard way, so don't feel bad. You know what I'm saying? Don't feel bad, because we are trying to heal and protect ourselves by any means necessary. And that's just the way it is. And so all I'm saying is that I've developed over 40 years of trouble a kind of methodology to structure dealing with this stuff in a very particular way, but it's a training. I think of it like a spiritual martial art.
yes.
Because if you don't have that level of respect for what's happening, you're going to get fucked up. You're going to get punched in the mouth, and it's
Right.
not going to feel good, and you might even die. And this
Right.
stuff is like, I'm not saying this to dissuade people from doing this work. I'm just saying this to, you need proper training and you need experience. You need to be careful. And that doesn't mean you have to join a lineage. It just means you have to screw your head on straight.
Mhm.
In the
Yes.
same way that when you're getting sober from any drug, you have to really fucking take a hard look at every part of your life, right?
Mhm.
You
Right.
just have to. You have to say, what are my thoughts doing? What kind of food am I eating? How is my housing, my hygiene? How is my hygiene? How am I cleaning myself? How am I, right? You have to look at everything,
Yeah.
because you have to find out where you're feeding the addiction.
Mm.
That's a sobriety process. What I'm talking about is also the roots of therapy, which is a ritual depossession, which you could call it an exorcism, but I think that word is too problematic in the West. I think that it's real. I've experienced it and I've participated in them. But
Yeah.
I think the word has too many narrative potholes for the West.
In the
So
West.
what I would just, yeah, so I would instead say hygiene.
Hmm.
We want to talk about spiritual hygiene. We want to talk about psychological hygiene, cognitive hygiene. We want to talk about emotional hygiene, physical hygiene, right? You want to talk about
I
hygiene.
mean, if I can smell you and we're doing qigong together, fuck, like, what is our community if you're the smelly one? I literally, that's what happened. I mean, no shade to any listeners, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a reality. And I have stopped going to a gathering because I just don't want to mention it. And I'm doing my own thing now, but physical hygiene is really up there with
Yeah.
the other hygienes.
They're not separate. They're connected. And I think that one of the issues we have is sometimes also people that are sick or possessed give off noxious odors because either
Mm.
from the interaction with the medicine and the disease or because of other factors that we don't really understand.
That's
But I
in
also do think that like there's a reason why Asian cultures have such a bathing culture. It's not
Oh,
like, like it's not like,
the
oh, this
Korean
is separate from,
spa.
it's like, no, 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 no. This is like, it's not just physical hygiene. It's being blessed by, it's like baptisms every day.
Yes.
Imagine if you got baptized every day by Pachamama.
Yes.
Something would change in your system,
Well, if you
right?
looked at a river and that's where you bathed every morning in cold water, I mean, in this day it would be vagal nerve
Yeah,
stimulation or
yeah,
whatever, like
sure,
in
sure.
2024. But like,
Right,
if
right,
you
right.
lived at a river, you would baptize every morning and live your life more
Yeah.
in harmony. Like, but
And
the
that's
thing
the
is,
point. The point is harmony. The point is hygiene equals harmony. That's, I think, what we
yeah,
can say for people because it's not really about your preferences as much as it's about right relationship. When you're in right relationship with the elemental forces, that's sort of like the prerequisite for doing the kind of work that I'm talking about. But it often happens side by side with people because we are such an educational mismatch in this culture. I'm still learning even as I'm teaching, which is to say, I'm I understand how we're in trouble. I understand we're in trouble. And part of the gift that the ancestors gave me was the permission in some way to just start helping people, even if you're not an elder or a master, because we just need fucking more hands helping. There's no time to waste anymore.
thank you.
And so accepting that job means that I have to keep learning and like it's a step, it's going together. It's not like I get to go to a monastery for 20 years and then come back and help everybody.
Yeah, we have no
That's
time.
not, we're not in this, there may not be 20 years for a lot of people. It's
Yeah,
really real.
we
I'm
have
also
this
have it,
year. This
I
is
mean,
the
it's
wood
just,
dragon year. So like, I mean, we're talking to each other, but we are talking because we are, trying to connect to the world, to our communities. I live in Oakland, you live in Portland. Like,
yeah,
hopefully in our little tiny communities that are both tiny, like
yeah,
radical areas,
yeah, yeah,
as listeners, think about what you want to contribute. Like, this is probably a lot to listen to because it's real, it's truth, and it also, there is a call to action because we need more hands. Like, on a spiritual level, we need more hands. And yes, you need to
yeah,
survive in capitalism and pay your rent and cook. And
yeah, all that.
all that is so hard. Doing laundry is so
Yeah,
hard.
it sucks.
It sucks. And it's like, but if we can really, having children, so fucking hard. But if we can really get to a point of helping each other, like, really, and if you can do it in a tiny little way, if
Yeah,
you can come to the bottoms up garden and plant something, or come to the Sundays, like, that would be an entryway to get in right relationship. Because when you hear all this, it can be so overwhelming. What do I do? I'm
of
so
course.
addicted. Yes, like, don't fall into the shame trap.
Yeah,
That's not what we're talking about. That's not decolonize. We're
yeah, that's
talking
not,
about how you, as listeners, can think about what you can contribute into this, like, new world,
yeah,
essentially, that we're like wanting to move towards, that's
yeah,
decolonized. And in Chinese medicine, it's like a reawakening of the Huangdi Neijing, because that was written, I think, like in 200s, like hella long ago. but they were saying the exact same thing that we're saying today in 2024, which was, how come back in the day everyone was so much happier and in harmony, and now we're not? And then Huang Jing was just the book was just like, be in tune with the season, like what we're
Yeah,
talking about.
totally. It's
So it's
the
like
same shit.
people, but that
Yeah.
was so long ago, and we can say,
Yeah.
oh, back
Yeah.
in 200 people were happy, they were. And so there's a, I don't know, like it's like a spiritual evolution that we are doing, I think. And so, but it's like, these are probably not the right words to be using, but like,
No.
just go like plant a tree, like get connected. Like you're saying, it's super simple, but in the big picture, this is like huge, thousands of years of work, thousands upon
No,
thousands.
so many ancestors. Like, I think we have to understand that, like, I mean, because if you, what you're saying is true. Like, if you read the Tao Te Ching, they're basically saying, we fucked up. Like, if you really read the Tao Te Ching from a decolonial lens, they're basically saying, we fucked up, fam.
Yeah,
They, the ancestors knew what was going on, and we don't. They
right.
were saying all this nation state stuff, this hyper agricultural army building shit, it's not really the way of nature. They were saying that, but it's hidden it's hidden, it's a little bit hidden because they were they were basically dissidents, right? It's like we have to understand that in the same way that we are fighting fascists now, fascist governments, they're also fighting fascist governments. Like, it has not really changed in about 2,000, 4,000 years. It has not changed
Uh,
much. It's still a kind of feudalism based on this idea of shaman kings who are like god king people. It's really scary when you think about it. It's like we shouldn't put the Chinese up on a pedestal, is all I'm saying.
uh-huh.
What we should do though is look at nature and find what is natural. Like, that's really the basis. And what seems to be natural in terms of psycho emotional spiritual health, which includes your thoughts, your narratives, the voices in your head, the feelings and the emotions in your heart and organs, the sensations in your body, the Kundalini energy, or Federico Garcia Lorca called it duende. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's earth
Uh-huh.
energy rising up the spine. It's the same thing. We can see patterns of nature, animism. So I think what we're kind of doing, at least I think I'm part of a movement of sort of maybe neo-animist revival. It's not about going back to superstition. It's about having the kind of perception that is flexible enough to know when rationality is lying to us.
Ooh.
Do you see what I'm saying? To know when we're defending ourselves from reality by saying we're rational, logical creatures.
And that was part 1 of episode 3 on the Three Treasures Tea Talk. I hope you found that interesting, and you can tune in for part 2 with Dare Carrasquillo talking about oppression and addiction.
Thank you for listening to today's Three Treasures Tea Talk.